From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. Is Andre Johnson
Jr.
That's right. It's Andre Johnson Jr. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. We are back on this Monday in June. The summer break, if you will, is here for the New Orleans Saints. We have watched an entire offseason, and away we go into this little gap here before the start of training camp in late July, where we head out west to California. But first things first, did you have a good weekend?
Yeah, we had a good weekend. I spent Sunday in Houston, surprised my dad out there. We went to an Astros game, so it was a fun Father's Day.
All right, nice. I hung out with my kids as well. We had a good little Father's Day weekend just around the house and went to the parents' house, all kind of stuff. So it was a good weekend all the way around. Okay, today we are back, and look, this is kind of the dry period here. We were getting into there's just not a whole lot of football going on, although there is a lot of still some storylines to talk about when it comes to the Saints. And I thought today would be a good day for our big picture to just say, you know what? They've finished the offseason program. We've got an up-close and personal look at a lot of these guys. I do it a lot. Why not have a 53-man roster projection as the Saints close out the offseason? We all know it's way too early and it's not going to stay this way, but I figure why not? It's a good time for a roster projection.
Certainly, and we are going to go position by position. We've gotten to see these guys over 3 weeks of OTAs, an entire week of minicamp. So we've seen a good bit of football from these guys so far, how they're picking up the systems. And where else could we start, Sean, but at the quarterback position?
Yeah, this is pretty obvious. We'll keep this one short and sweet. I still have 3 quarterbacks making the roster. It's Derek Carr, it's Spencer Rattler, it's Jake Haener. I don't see Nathan Peterman making the roster. The only thing I can think with him is he's a guy that Derek Carr likes, the quarterback coach likes, veteran presence to see certain things in certain situations. Maybe he's I don't even know if he's got practice squad eligibility, if that's a possibility, just to keep him around the locker room for a guy like Derek Carr. But I don't see how you can. I don't even see how you can do this during training camp, because we saw the rotation during the offseason program where it was, he would blend in, like when it was 13 reps, he would get the first rep and then the last rep, and whoever the 13 quarterback was, they would get 4 or 5, and he would end up with like 3 passes in an entire practice. I don't know how long that formula is going to last. So I think this is pretty straightforward. It's Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener, with obviously the battle for QB2 being between Rattler and Haener.
Right. I mean, the 3 that are going to make or that we're projecting to make the roster, it's pretty obvious. The most interesting part of it will come in training camp, where we really decide what the order of those 3 will be. We know Carr will be number 1.
Yeah.
Haener versus Rattler is going to be maybe the most talked about Saints topic throughout training camp and the 3 weeks in the preseason.
Yeah, and the good thing is you'll see a lot of them in training camp, and you'll see a ton of them in the preseason. I don't foresee Derek Carr playing a whole lot in the preseason, although that may be good for him. But I think you're going to see a lot of Haener and a lot of Rattler in the preseason. But so for now, those are the 3 that we have making the Saints roster at quarterback.
And now we move on to running back / fullback. We're kind of combining those positions. Who we got on the roster?
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward just because I don't know how it's going to develop. Kamara, assuming everything has worked out with the contract. Jamal Williams, he's the veteran. And Kendre Miller, obviously the second-year pro. I put Taysom Hill on this list because we saw him at tailback, we saw him at fullback, and how much does that impact the actual fullback position? I have Adam Prentice on this list right now, but is he better than a guy like Xander Horvath? Do they even need this position with a guy like Taysom Hill? I don't know, and I don't know how the roster puzzle is going to shape out. But so I think that's 5 running backs / fullbacks right now. I like the talent in this room, especially if Kamara has everything settled. I like the emergence of Kendre Miller. I think Williams would be better. I'm very curious about the Taysom Hill development. But there's some other names that actually had a few moments during the offseason that I think certainly could watch as we get into training camp and into the preseason. Jordan Mims, James Robinson. We mentioned Horvath, the fullback, kind of battling with Adam Prentice, although I don't know how they're going to approach that position with Taysom Hill's versatility there. And then Jacob Kabodi out of ULL, the running back as well. So running back is always one of those positions where it's easy to follow the ball. And obviously in training camp, you get a little bit better feel for those guys because they can get hit. When in the offseason, there's no pads and they're not going to the ground. And I will say this, it's felt like this offseason with the new offensive coaching staff, whatever the case may be, they blew the whistle on running plays extremely early. And I know it's usually, look, if they get touched, you blow the whistle. It felt like they blew the whistle extremely early on a few running plays. So it was hard to get a gauge on who might be good or might be, falling behind. But I think this is a pretty fair assessment of where the running back room is right now. And we'll see if that changes with training camp and preseason.
Right. I mean, no big surprise on that list. Obviously, the status of Alvin Kamara could be an earthquake to these projections, but assuming he's going to be there, I think this is a good 5 to have around. And the player I'm most excited to see right now is Kendre Miller.
Yeah.
I touched on it briefly on Thursday when we did the podcast, but Kendre says he is feeling 100% healthy. He's not even thinking about those injuries that kind of plagued them last season. And he said, quote, he is ready to prove why the Saints drafted him, and he sounds hungry. I think it'll be exciting to see.
I love that confidence, especially at that position, because they need that. They need that. Just on the entire roster, just that kind of confidence. So I love it. What's next?
Next is the wide receiver position, another one where you've got a lot of guys battling and really only one or two that have set themselves apart.
Yeah. This is a room where you watch practice, you see certain things, you like what you see, and then when you really break down the actual position, is there concerns here? Is it settled in? Let's just go by the names. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson, and Bub Means. That's 5 receivers. Now, we've talked about Chris Olave's emergence as the number 1 receiver. I think that's going to happen. I think we started to see that happen last year. I like the way the season ended for A.T. Perry, and I like Rashid Shaheed, his ability. Is that trio good enough to be your main trio in this new offense? Well, I think that remains to be seen because you have a reliable veteran in Cedric Wilson, who I told you I liked. I like a lot in this offense, his presence. He made plays in the offseason. I think he's a guy that certainly can be trusted in situations. I think he's clearly the oldest guy in this room, and then obviously Bub Means, which is the rookie. But I think Cedric Wilson is a guy that could see himself getting on the field quite a bit with some legitimate snaps. Other names that I didn't put on there, but the guys to consider: Aquamanius St. Brown, Stanley Morgan, Jermaine Jackson. I know Morgan's more of a special teams guy. He was doing some more work off to the side. Jermaine Jackson is an undrafted rookie. EQ St. Brown started to make a few plays. The last week of the minicamp, we were able to see him. He's got some size. He runs certain routes with effectiveness that might blend well with this offense. His ability to kind of get horizontal, if you will, like maybe kind of the over route, the under, the drag, the crossers. So he's someone to certainly watch, and he's 6'5", and they've always talked about that big possession type receiver. I don't have him on this projection yet, but there's a lot of youth in this group, and that could be a good thing. That can be a good thing. But I do know this group has been coached up quite a bit this offseason, and I expect that to remain, probably pick up the intensity once training camp and preseason rolls around, because they need some more production out of this group. So right now, that's the 5: Olave, Shaheed, Perry, Wilson, and Means.
I was at the last minicamp practice on Thursday, and the best play that I saw, they were doing like a late game situation thing. I believe there were 3 seconds left on the clock. Offense down 6, and Derek Carr makes a phenomenal throw to Chris Olave. And Chris Olave is one guy who has really stood out.
Yes.
It seems like he makes plays every single day. And I know we call Derek Carr the offseason MVP so far, but I believe you said earlier there was a second place for that.
It would be Olave.
Chris Olave.
It would be Chris
he
Olave.
has been incredible so far in this offseason program.
Yeah, he's been good. And I think he can be a 1. I think he can be a 1, not just a low tier 1. I think he could be a legitimate 1 in the NFL, because I think you're starting to see his growth as a route runner, the details in his routes. He's very smooth, and it feels like he's gotten a little bit stronger. So he's making more contested catches, at least of what we saw in the offseason. So we'll see what happens at the wide receiver position.
Right. It's a very deep position, and now we go to a position that's not as deep, especially after a key injury to one of their players. Let's talk about tight end, Sean.
let's talk tight ends. I have 3 on right now, but that's only because Taysom Hill I already put at running back. So Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and Dallin Holker. Juwan Johnson has the injury, very vague injury, and even vaguer recovery in terms of when he could be back on the field. If he's not on the field during training camp and into the regular season, this could certainly be an issue. And if they were, I could see them addressing that position, which they did with Jesper Horsted. They signed after minicamp. So I'm not going to put him on this projection. Obviously, we just saw him. He was just signed, but this group is interesting because you have Morrow. We know kind of what he can do. I've raved about Dallin Holker in the offseason, but it is his first offseason. But I do feel like it's what I've always said. Like, who's in front of him? And excuse me, they need players at this position. So I like the emergence of Dallin Holker. They need Juwan Johnson to be healthy because he's a playmaker when he's healthy, even if he struggled a little bit to start the season last year. Other names to consider, Michael Jacobson. We mentioned Horsted, the guy they had just signed from, I forget where he's from, but nonetheless, the Saints had just added him onto the roster as they get into the offseason and into training camp. But this group is interesting because of how much this offense likes the bootleg, likes the, that play action. And a lot of the play action is that tight end dragging across the field or able to work themselves into certain grooves of zones where you're supposed to be. So this is a tight end offense where they utilize them a lot. You'll see a lot of 2 tight end sets. You'll see a lot of 21 personnel with a fullback as well. So this is, or 22 personnel with 2 tight ends and a fullback. So you're talking about a position that's valued in this offense. And I don't. There's some questions there, how good that group can truly be.
Definitely, and a guy who stood out to both of us has been Dallin Holker, and we got to talk to him on Thursday, and it was a really fun and refreshing conversation.
Yeah.
We only talked to him for about 3 minutes, but, he mentioned, like, he didn't expect to go undrafted, but
Right.
he's kind of using that as a chip on his shoulder. He says he remembers the teams that passed on him, and he wants to show them why it was a mistake. He's very confident in his run after the catch ability, which we've mentioned in this offense is a big thing for anybody who's operating as a pass catcher in this offense to have. So Dallin Holker, especially with the injury to Juwan Johnson, we don't know how long, how bad of an injury that's going to be, but in the situation where Juwan Johnson is out, I think it'll be fun to see how much of an early impact Dallin Holker really could have in this offense.
Yeah, and if he's out for a significant time in training camp, a ton of reps for Dallin Holker. And look, I wrote it in my 5 takes blog. I mean, I don't want to overhype this guy because, I mean, he's a good player. But my confidence in him making the team, and not just making the team, but being a contributor is the highest I've ever had for an undrafted rookie, ever. Not just because of the way he plays, because of the position. There's not a lot in front of him, even with Juwan Johnson. And now Juwan Johnson could be out. He's going to get a ton of reps. And right now he's done well with those reps. And we'll see if he picks that up when the pads come on, which is obviously a big deal when you talk about the tight end position because you're asked to do a lot. You got to block, you got to chip, you got to make, run routes, all that stuff. Run block, pass block, all those things. So that's the group as I see it right now.
Right, and that's what Dennis Allen said when he talked about Holker on that last day of minicamp. He said he wants to see how physical he can be when they get those pads on. So that'll be fun to watch. And, I mean, just a few years ago, we saw an undrafted free agent make a pretty big impact in the offense. That was Rashid Shaheed. Yeah. Now he's pretty much pinned in as a starting receiver. So we'll see how that position plays out. Up next is the position where maybe you might have the most eyes on when training camp does come and you can see those guys with the pads on, a position where we could still see a lot of shifting, and that's the offensive line.
Man, it's one of those things where I gravitate to the offensive line as being the biggest X factor in how successful this team can be this year. I mean, you look at some of the other positions and you have some confidence level in certain areas. Maybe there's a little dip in some depth in some other areas. But the offensive line, based off of depth and actual front line talent, how good are they? If it comes together, I think you can have a great season. If it does not, it could be a disaster for this season. But here we go. We got Taliese Fuaga, left tackle. Nick Saldiveri so far been left guard. Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Trevor Penning. That's been your starting 5. Back 4, I have Landon Young, Lucas Patrick, Aliudo, and Shane Lemieux. Okay, I have been on the record on this podcast as saying we've seen the same 5 through OTAs and minicamp, and I'm still not convinced that's going to be the exact 5 when the season starts, because there's a ton of youth, and like I just told you, they've got to get this right for this new offense to work. You cannot play around with this because so much of the offense is not just pass blocking, it's run blocking as well. And last year, they were terrible in the run game. So that's got to get better for this offense to work, because this is, at its core, a run-first offense, as I've said multiple times. So that's the one thing when you talk about the starting 5. Okay, do you even have your starting 5 yet? Then you get to the depth numbers. I mean, I like Lucas Patrick as a veteran, who I think could still settle in at guard. Landon Young's been around for a while. He's a decent swing tackle as a reserve. Ali Udo's a guy, didn't get much time in minicamp and offseason, but DA mentioned him by name, and one of the questions he was asked in the press conference when he closed out the offseason. The only reason why I put Lemieux on here is because the first day we were out there, he got first-team left guard reps. He's had some injuries over his career, but that's certainly not a guarantee, and he's a veteran, and a lot of times there's some weird manipulation with a veteran on the first day of the regular season, and it's guaranteeing the contract, all that kind of stuff, so that can certainly play in. Other names, Justin Herron, Mark Evans, and Josiah Ezram, the 7th-round pick, could ultimately be in the mix. So this group right here, it's a total question mark. Total question mark, because they're in a totally new scheme. You got one guy playing the right, one guy playing the left, who their entire careers they were playing opposite, and you got a guy that didn't play at all last year at starting left guard. So 3 out of 5, you have no idea what's going to happen. That's just a starting 5. So I still think that you're going to play with that a little bit, because I don't know if that's going to finish like that. And then depth-wise, what do you have behind it? So look no further than the offensive line as the biggest question for me heading into the Saints this season.
You're right. There are a lot of questions there. You know, when you get those pads on and we see how effective these guys are going to be, will Taliesin Fuaga stay on that left side, or will he move back to the right where he's more comfortable? Will Penning move back to the left? Will they stay where they're at? We've seen Nick Saldiveri take first-team reps in every practice until the very last one, where he left with what Dennis Allen called a minor injury, and that's when Shane Lemieux and Lucas Patrick were able to kind of mix in there. But, you know, will Nick Saldiveri be able to hold those 2 veterans off when we get the pads on and when we get into the preseason games? That'll be fun to watch. But, yeah, you know, a young offensive line with, a third-year guy, a second-year guy, and a rookie, on a position as important as that, yeah, you're going to want to get that right.
And I'll say that that's no place to experiment. Like, if you're confident in the guy, you're confident in the guy. If you're not, turn to the veteran. Like, to me, that's at all 3 of the positions, the left tackle, right tackle, and left guard. If your confidence level is there, you can go with them. I don't think you can risk, like, a dip for a rookie and just hope he kind of figures it out by the end of the year. I think at that position, for that many unknowns up front, you're going to have to be pretty quick on when you have to turn to the veteran, the rookie, or the young players to continue to make mistakes, which we'll see how they handle it once the pads come on. I don't want to discount where they're at, because they've shown some development, but we don't know anything about these guys until the pads come on, and these joint practices, and obviously the preseason games and in training camp practices as well. All right, what's next?
While we're staying in the trenches, we might as well move to the other side and talk about the defensive ends, one of the most competitive positions that you're going to see as we head into training camp.
Yeah, we've all sort of had the same feeling about defensive ends. A lot of bodies, a lot of investments, a lot of big names. It's just who will emerge out of this group. But my 5 are Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, and Isaiah Falsky. Asterisk, now you'll see, is Tano Passanio, depending on what he does, how he recovers from his torn Achilles when that comes. We have to get the exact timeline, but I would imagine at the earliest, late September, October, before he's even there. So he's probably going to be on PUP, short-term IR, whatever the case may be. So I think he's around, but I don't think he's available for quite some time. So we've talked about this a lot, this defensive end position. Cam Jordan getting a little bit older. Carl Granderson was rock solid, maybe the best defender on the team last year. Chase Young is the guy they absolutely hope can emerge and be the guy. Peyton Turner. I'll put him on here because I don't think he's been beaten out yet, but he's got to show something. And then obviously Isaiah Falsey going into his second season, they obviously have high hopes for him, but still he's got to get there. So a lot of investment, a lot of money being spent on at this position, and yet the lowest paid guy is the one that's emerged and become the most consistent going into the 2024 season, that being Carl Granderson, before he obviously got his extension last year. So I kind of like this group. I just hope someone can be a beast out of this group because they need to have someone that can do that.
I love this group when healthy. The issue right now is half of the 6 guys we just named aren't healthy, but that also creates opportunity. You mentioned Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. Right now, this is their time to shine as they head into training camp. We don't know what Cam Jordan's injury status will be. He's been out there, but he's still recovering from something. Chase Young was kind of mum on whether he'll be at training camp. The expectation is probably that he won't be there. We know Tano Passignon won't be there. So when they get those pads on, going against that young offensive line, that's the time for the Peyton Turners and the Isaiah Foskeys of the world to step up and show a little something.
It's your opportunity, man. Do it. Make plays. So there's nothing else to really say. I mean, like, and here's the thing. I don't think Foskey would get cut, but is Turner's spot guaranteed?
No.
Is Turner's spot guaranteed? I mean, really.
They did decline his 5th-year option.
Exactly. So to me, he's got to show it because I think, that the first round status has worn off. I mean, you've already got beaten out by an undrafted rookie a couple of years ago. Granderson, I'm talking about, who was an undrafted player who's passed you up. So he developed like they wanted, not you. So he's got to stay healthy. He's got to be available just to earn the roster spot. All right, what's next?
Defensive tackle, because we got to stay in the trenches and get to the 4 guys who you believe are going to make the 53-man roster.
All right, let's put the list up. Brian Brzee, Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard, Christian Boyd. I don't think we've talked about this position enough in terms of concern. There's not a lot of... I think Brzee can take a step forward, but I didn't see much of him in OTAs in terms of the teamwork he was doing. Saunders, I think, is solid. Shepard, I think, is solid. A little older, but solid. Christian Boyd is a rookie that I hope can be ready soon because I'm looking at the numbers here. Depth-wise, they're not very deep. The only other name I put down there was Kendall Vickers, a veteran. They got some first-team reps during the off-season program. That's because a lot of guys were out at one point. So, D-tackle, I am still concerned with, and I still think the Saints, if there's a quality veteran that becomes available at some point, whether they get released, whatever the case may be, the Saints must consider that, in my opinion, because I still think this group is a little thin, and this is a group that's got to get better at stopping the run. I think they struggled with that a season ago. So defensive tackle, Brzee, Saunders, Shepard, Boyd. I don't know how confident I feel in this group right now.
Yeah, I think the hope and expectation is that Brian Brzee heading into year 2 takes a big step forward. But if he doesn't, like you said, this isn't a very deep group. This isn't a group that has a lot of young players that have a whole bunch of upside, like you would say. You got Brzee and you got Christian Boyd, who was drafted in the 6th round.
Right.
And then you got 2 veterans. So, I mean, if an injury were to hit this unit, I mean, where would they be then? So, yeah, I agree. It's definitely a group that goes under the radar, and probably because you've got Brian Brzee, who a lot of people have a lot of faith in to take that leap in year 2. But if for whatever reason that doesn't happen, that could definitely be the biggest problem spot on the defense.
And let me just say, I think they drafted him to be that. By year 2, to be the guy, to be the main D tackle, and that's possibly to look one of OTAs with no pads on. But he wasn't doing a whole lot of teamwork. I don't know if he's coming back from some kind of surgery or some kind of injury, but at least the practices we were able to see, he didn't get a whole lot of team reps. Brian Brzee, I'm talking about. So if he emerges and becomes a beast, this problem's solved. But we don't know that yet. So that's where I stand with defensive tackle. What's next?
Up next, we're going to the second level to talk about these linebackers.
All right. This was an interesting group because it's pretty deep. Talk about DeMario Davis, Pete Werner, Willie Gay, Jalen Ford, DeMarco Jackson, Nephi Sewell. Okay, you obviously know your top 3 with Davis, Werner, and Gay. Jalen Ford was a draft pick. We haven't seen him do anything because he's been rehabbing his injury. Hopefully that's something that he can get taken care of, and he's on the field by training camp. And he's able to contribute in some form or fashion. Nephi Sewell's a guy I know they like. He's coming off of an injury. He stepped up in certain situations, so I think he could be a solid depth guy. DeMarco Jackson, I think, can contribute on special teams, although I don't think his spot is guaranteed. A couple of guys that I didn't put on there, Anthony Orji, Khalid Hudson, could be factored into the mix when it comes to the linebacker position. But, now that when I wrote it out, and I kind of looked at the numbers. I was like, this is a pretty good group right here. This isn't a bad group when you talk about all these players. And if you watch the offseason, if you watch minicamp practices and OTAs, there were some practices where these linebackers showed up and showed out. So I kind of like where this linebacker group stands. I think they're well coached. I think they got a good mix of young and old and in their prime players. And overall, I know the D-line may have a little bit of question mark, both D-tackle and D-end, but I think the linebacker position is pretty solid.
I think the play of Pete Werner is what's going to dictate how we look at this unit by the time the season is over. I think you pretty much know what you're getting out of DeMario Davis. You can approximate what you're getting out of Willie Gay Jr., but Pete Werner, we saw him 2 years ago be one of the best players on the defense. He maybe took a bit of a step back last year, so I'm curious to see where he's going to be this year. If he takes a step back from where he was last year, that might change how we look at this linebacker unit. But if he can take a step forward, not just from where he was last year, but where he was in 2022, and be a really solid option and still a very young guy at linebacker, I would love to see it for the Saints.
Motivation, too. Going into a contract, motivation. So Pete Werner has incentive to play better. There was 2 practices where I saw him. He was the best defender on the field. So, yeah, you're right. If he could revert back to 2022 where he started the season, it was like, whoa, this guy's everywhere. They were awesome. We know DeMario Davis seems to be the ageless one, and Willie Gay is a guy that's got a very unique skill set that I know the Saints will figure out a way to get on the field. So I like the linebacker position. What's next?
Up next is probably the deepest position on defense, and that's cornerback.
Best position group on the team, no doubt about it. You look at the names, you look at the depth, and you look at just the overall production. Let's take a look. It's Marshawn Lattimore, it's Paulson Adebo, it's Alontae Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and I put Ugo Amade because he is pretty much the guy that steps up at nickel when there's some kind of injury or some kind of rotation at that position. I think he's probably you consider maybe the backup nickel, can also play some safety, can also play some special teams. So I don't really think I need to address it much more. I mean, I love Lattimore when he's healthy. He's a top 5 corner in the league. Adebo has emerged as a very good counterpart to Lattimore. Taylor, we'll see. I mean, can he be the true nickel? I hope so. They drafted him. They want to get him on the field. He's a former second-round pick, but he got another second-round pick in Kool-Aid McKinstry that's going to battle him as well. That's going to be great for both those guys. Because whoever the best player is going to win that job. The other one will have to back him up. That just provides depth and obviously competition. And I've already mentioned about Ugo Amade, who offers some versatility. You could probably put him at the safety group as well. But nonetheless, I don't think anything else really needs to be said. I think this is the best position group on the team.
Definitely, and I'm interested in that nickel cornerback battle. I mean, Dennis Allen basically said, cut Alontae Taylor some slack because last year he was essentially a young guy playing a position he'd never played before, a nickel. He said he thinks Alontae did a pretty good job, and I did the story on Kool-Aid McKinstry last week. Kool-Aid, I finally got to ask him, outside, inside, which one would you rather play? He said it doesn't matter. He came from Alabama. He learned under Nick Saban. He said he's ready to play wherever the defense dictates, outside, inside. He's confident in either one. He says physically, he finally got out there and did some individual drill work on Thursday for the first time, and he said he was just glad to be out there. Dennis Allen says physically he still has a bit to prove because he hasn't been able to be out there for the rest of the offseason program, but he was very complimentary of where Kool-Aid is from a mental standpoint.
And he's come from that Alabama program. I could tell you that I do a ton of these, I do a lot of film. So I watch a lot of old videos of Nick Saban coverages, how elaborate they can be, how complex they can be, and how really football IQ smart you have to be to operate. So we certainly got that versatility. I thought it was interesting. DA, he had a great line. He said, Alontae Taylor, last year he hit a certain ceiling, and this year that ceiling is his floor.
Yep.
So they feel like he's gotten to where he needed to be competent last year, and then they think that's sort of the floor where he's going to be this year, and hopefully his stock is rising. So that's going to be one of the best battles of training camp. We've already discussed that, but Alontae Taylor versus Kool-Aid McKinstry. So we'll see how that position group shakes out, but to me, this is the strongest group on the team. What's next?
Up next, we have one of the cornerback's best friends, and that's the guys over the top, the safeties.
All right, I have 5 safeties on this list. Tyrann Mathieu, Jordan Howden, Jonathan Abram, Will Harris, and J.T. Gray. J.T. Gray is obviously a phenomenal special teams player. Will Harris is a guy I think is flying under the radar. I thought he had a good practice, the last practice of camp, or of OTAs, excuse me. Jonathan Abram is a guy that really came on strong at the end of last season. He's gotten some first-team reps. Early on, we saw a lot of Jordan Howden with the first team at safety, but I got to tell you, the last couple times we watched him, he wasn't with the first team. He was on the field. He was kind of mixing and matching, but he wasn't always the first-team safety. Jonathan Abram was next to Matthew. Howden was. Yeah, Will Harris in certain situations. So this is an interesting group. It's an interesting mix. We'll see if they add to this group at some point. But if it were to stay like this, the way the roster shakes out, this would be my 5: Matthew, Howden, Abram, Harris, and Gray. Another guy that played well. I think he led the team in interceptions during the offseason is Millard Bradford, an undrafted rookie. We'll see if he's able to sneak his way on with special teams work. But good group, not as strong as the cornerback position, but strong nonetheless. And like I've always said, DA is not going to have a bad defensive backfield. He's going to have a good DB room, and that includes safety. So that's the 5 I have right now.
Right, and obviously when you draft young players, you hope that one day they wind up being the face of their position and the background of your team. In this case, the background of your defense, the backbone of your defense. And that's what you would hope Jordan Howden can do in year 2. We talked about Brian Brzee making the jump from year 1 to year 2. Earlier, we talked about Kendre Miller potentially having a breakout season. You would hope Jordan Howden can step up and really be that every down safety opposite of Tyrann Mathieu. Now, we'll see how that goes in training camp and preseason, but that's what the hope would be if you're the New Orleans Saints.
And I think that's a theme for 2024 is those second-year guys making that leap. Because they had minimal impact. You talk about Kendre, you talk about Brian Brzee, you talk about who else? Howden had his moments last year. But for the most part, I think they want to see a leap from those guys. And if those guys can take that leap from year 1 to year 2, you might talk about, one of the reasons why they had some success this season is because those guys made that jump. So we'll see what happens, but certainly Jordan Howden is in that mix. He's a very smart player. He really is a smart football player with some versatility. And I know they'd like to see him become the guy, but he's got to prove it on the field. I think that's almost it. What do we have next?
The last thing, we are closing out with the specialists.
All right. So they spent a lot of time with special teams work this offseason. But I got to go with the incumbents just to start things off. I got to go with Groupie. I got to go with Headley. I got to go with Zach Wood. I still think this is a wide-open competition. Groupie versus Charlie Smith, the Irishman. Luke Headley versus Matthew is it Hayball?
Yeah.
From Vanderbilt, the punter. I thought Headley showed some improvement this year. I thought Groupie was a little up and down, but his competition was probably a little more up and down. I think Zach Wood might have the safest job on the team because I don't think they don't have another long snapper. So I don't think this is a guarantee here, but I'm sticking with the incumbents just for now. Blake Groupie, Lou Headley, and Zach Wood.
While we're on special teams, we didn't get to film it at all during OTAs and minicamp, but for me, one of the most interesting parts, just because it's so new and I think a lot of fans will be interested in it next year, are the new kickoffs.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And Dennis Allen spoke on it. He was like, to be honest, it's hard to even evaluate right now because it's so new to everybody. So it just, how you got the kickoff team and the returning team essentially face-to-face. Nobody can move until the ball is kicked. And it was just so interesting to watch the day I got to go out there to minicamp.
It was like, you hear about it. You hear about the rule. They kind of do the little graphic on TV. And this was when we finally got to see it. I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." If you don't know, it's the kicker, and is it 10 guys across at the 30, and then it's 9 receiving team across for the 25, so they're 5 yards apart, and there's 2 return guys, and no one can move until the ball is caught by the return man, and the strategy is totally different. And I just got to think that given, the way it's returned and how I watched it unfold in a few practices that I was able to watch, there's going to be a lot more returns for touchdowns this year. A lot more kickoff returns for touchdowns because everyone is so close. If you were able to break through that first layer, that first wave of defenders, there's no one else left to stop you except the kicker at that point. So That is something to really watch because that's probably a bigger game changer than people realize right now. This new kickoff rule is going to add a totally different dynamic to special teams that we hadn't seen in quite some time because last 4 or 5 years it's been what? Like 90% touchbacks.
Touchbacks were pretty much expected. And
yeah.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in the meeting room of the special teams just to see how they're telling guys to block. Do you send... Do you try to push the guys to the left and tell your returners go to the right, try to get around the outside to some space? I'm so interested in what ultimately the strategy is going to be for the return team and the kicking team to stop them.
And I got to get a little more into the nuts and bolts of the rules in terms of what can and can't happen and blocking rules and touchback rules. And obviously there's no more surprise onside kicks. You only onside kick late in the game. But this is gonna be a bigger impact than people realize right now. Everyone talks about offense, defense, all that stuff, but this new kickoff rule is gonna be something to watch. And the first time y'all see it in a preseason game, whoa, it's gonna look really.
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting to watch because I think it's gonna change the game quite a bit.
Yep, and I'm excited. It's one of the many things I'm excited. Once we can finally get into training camp and see these preseason games, see these guys with the pads on, see them start hitting and really see who sets themselves apart. When we get to that part, man, it's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun. It is going to be fun. But we still got about 5 weeks or so before we get into training camp. Got some time to enjoy the summer break, relax, rewind, refresh, because when late July gets here, we're going to be going all gas, no breaks. Well, anyway, that's my 53-man roster. I can't even talk today. Feel free to like it, hate it, comment about it. I can guarantee you it's not going to finish that way. I'm going to have at least 5 or 6 more before the final cuts come. So that's it. Take it or leave it. So anyway, been a good day. Anything else for us today?
Nope, I'm great.
All right, Andre Johnson Jr. is great. I am great. This has been a great podcast. So for Andre, I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.